You don't expect your own brother to use your name like it's a spare key. But that's exactly how it started. I was 27, working a steady but unremarkable job as a project coordinator at a small architecture firm in Columbus, Ohio. I wasn't flashy or loud, but I was consistent. The kind of person bosses like because they knew I'd show up and get things done. My brother, Dean, was the opposite. He was 3 years younger, always chasing the next big opportunity, never satisfied, and constantly talking about networking his way into something bigger. He had a habit of cutting corners, and while it annoyed me, I figured that was his problem, not mine. At least until he decided my identity was a shortcut he could borrow. It started small, or at least it seemed that way at first. A friend mentioned seeing me at a business conference downtown that I had no memory of attending. When I brushed it off, she gave me this puzzled look, saying, "But you introduced yourself. You even had your badge on." I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a mix-up, but it planted a strange thought in the back of my head. How could someone mistake Dean for me? We didn't look identical, but he had a way of imitating people that sometimes felt uncanny. Then came the emails. Invitations to networking luncheons, thank you notes from people I didn't recognize, follow-ups on great conversations I never had. At first, I thought it was spam, until I saw one signed off with, "Excited to see where your career takes you, Ethan." That was me, and it wasn't a typo. If you've ever had someone blur your boundaries without asking, you know the mix of irritation and unease. On one hand, it seems almost flattering. Someone thought your life was worth stepping into. On the other, it's invasive. It's like realizing a window you thought was locked has been wide open for weeks. I told myself maybe it was just Dean dropping my name in passing, bragging about me to score points. But the signs kept stacking. A message from a company executive thanking me for attending a pitch event. A voicemail from a recruiter who said she was impressed by my drive. It wasn't just name dropping. Someone was moving in my lane, playing as me, and I didn't need to guess who. The real shock didn't land until I saw a posted photo from one of those events. There, in a crisp shirt that wasn't his style, smiling next to a group of business leaders, stood Dean. The name tag on his chest read, Ethan. My name, my career, my reputation, and all I could think was, what exactly had he promised them in my place? Once I saw that photo, there was no more shrugging it off. Dean wasn't just borrowing my name in conversation. He was showing up to actual events, shaking hands, and planting himself in circles that should have been mine to step into if I wanted. It felt like someone had hacked into my future. I called him that night, trying to keep calm. "Dean, why are people telling me they've met me when I haven't been there?" He didn't even sound guilty. He laughed, like I was overreacting. "Relax, man. It's networking. These suits just want someone sharp to talk to. You never go to these things anyway." The casual tone burned me more than if he'd yelled. He acted like it was harmless, like wearing my identity for a night was the same as borrowing a jacket. But here's the thing. When you work years to build credibility, every impression matters. You know how hard it is to get people to take you seriously, especially when you're still climbing. Dean didn't get that. He only saw the shortcut, not the slow grind that gave my name weight in the first place. I told him it needed to stop. He brushed me off, saying, "It's a win-win. You get your name out there more, I get practice. What's the problem?" That line stuck with me. A win-win. For who? I was the one whose name was being stretched thin across promises I hadn't made. The next week, the problem escalated. My boss called me into her office. She asked, with this sharp look, why I had been shopping myself around to other firms at a recent industry luncheon. I froze. I had no idea what she was talking about. She described conversations I had with a competitor about being eager to jump ship for the right offer. My stomach dropped. That wasn't me. But she didn't know that. She only knew my name was on the badge. That moment was when irritation turned into fear. Careers can bend or break on perception. And suddenly my reputation wasn't in my control anymore. Dean wasn't just borrowing me. He was rewriting me in rooms I'd never even walked into. I went home that night, sat at my desk, and stared at the stack of documents I kept in my drawer. Passport, social security card, old college ID, even my birth certificate. Dean knew where I kept them. And a cold thought hit me. What if he wasn't stopping at conferences? I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Dean rifling through my desk, pulling out whatever he needed to slip deeper into my life. The idea of him holding my social security card or waving my passport at some check-in counter made my chest tighten. It wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. It was about legality, responsibility, things that could stick to me forever. The next morning, I checked the drawer. Sure enough, a couple of things were missing. My old student ID was gone, and so was a copy of my birth certificate I tucked behind a folder. I sat there, staring at the empty space, trying to decide if I was overreacting or finally seeing the full picture. Dean had always been reckless, but this felt different. It felt deliberate. I called him again, sharper this time. "Did you take my documents?" He paused, then did that half-laugh he always used when he was cornered. "Man, you don't even use half that stuff." "I just needed something to get in the door. Chill out." Hearing him say it so casually made me want to slam the phone down. He didn't get it, or maybe he did and just didn't care. Here's the thing. When someone in your own family crosses a boundary that far, it forces you to see them differently. You start asking yourself, am I dealing with carelessness, or am I dealing with someone who thinks my life is theirs to carve into? And for the first time, I wasn't sure I could trust my brother with even the smallest piece of me. The fallout wasn't hypothetical anymore either. A week later, I got an email from a regional planning association thanking me for attending a board meeting on behalf of my firm. Only problem was, I hadn't been there, which meant Dean had not only impersonated me, he'd spoken for the company that signed my paycheck. That wasn't just awkward, that was grounds for termination. I stared at the email, my hand shaking. If my boss found out, how would I explain that my own brother had been parading around as me? Who would even believe that? Most people barely believe siblings would borrow clothes without asking, let alone legal identity documents. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The person who could destroy my career fastest wasn't a rival or a boss. It was the guy who shared my last name. I kept that email on my screen for almost an hour, reading it over and over, trying to figure out how bad the damage could get. The language was polite, but it was specific. "Your comments on cross-district coordination were insightful." Comments I had never made, in a room I had never entered. Dean wasn't just lurking in the background anymore. He was speaking, taking positions, tying my name to opinions that could circle back to my employer. That night I drove straight to my parents' house, where Dean was still living. I didn't even knock. I went straight to his room, and there it was, on his desk, my student ID sitting next to a stack of event badges with my name printed across them. He looked up, startled but not ashamed. He acted like I'd just caught him borrowing my charger. "Man, you're being so uptight," he said. "I'm building connections for both of us. You'll thank me later." It's strange how someone can twist reality so confidently you start doubting yourself. For a second, I almost wanted to believe him. Maybe he thought he was helping. Maybe it was all harmless. But then I thought about that email, about my boss's face when she asked why I was shopping around. This wasn't help. This was theft in slow motion. I told him to hand everything back, documents, badges, whatever he had. He smirked and slid the student ID across the desk, but kept the rest piled up behind him like a poker hand he wasn't folding. "Relax, Ethan. You're acting like I robbed a bank. I'm just using what's available." That line burned. What's available? As if my identity were a tool left lying around in the garage. Driving home, I realized confrontation wasn't enough. Words weren't going to stop him. Dean didn't hear limits unless there were consequences. And that left me with two options: tell my boss the truth before things spun further, or keep quiet and hope Dean got bored. Neither option sat right. If I confessed, I'd look irresponsible for letting it happen. If I stayed silent, I risked losing everything I'd worked for if his performance under my name backfired. And just as I was weighing it, the phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, my stomach sank. It was a government office. They wanted to confirm my attendance at a visa information session in Chicago. Except, of course, I had never been to Chicago that month. The voicemail played twice before I stopped it. I sat there in my car, parked outside my apartment, staring at the steering wheel like it might give me an answer. Chicago? A visa session? That wasn't just some industry mixer anymore. This was federal paperwork territory. The kind where your name gets logged into systems you don't mess with lightly. I called the number back, trying to sound casual. The woman on the line confirmed that Ethan had signed in, asked a handful of questions about international work opportunities, and even left a callback address. She rattled off an email that wasn't mine. I hung up with a cold pit in my stomach. Dean had gone from networking games to planting seeds in official channels. That was a whole new level of reckless. You know that feeling when you realize someone else is steering the story of your life without your consent? That was me. I had spent years building a reputation as dependable, steady, reliable. And in the span of a few weeks, Dean was turning my name into a mask for his experiments. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with HR. I rehearsed what to say a dozen times, trying to strike the balance between honest and not pathetic. My brother has been impersonating me at events. Sounded absurd even in my own head, like some excuse you'd hear in a bad sitcom. But when your job could be on the line, absurd or not, the truth was the only card you had left. Before I could even get to HR though, something else happened. My boss forwarded me an invitation for a follow-up meeting with the same planning association that had thanked me earlier. She added a quick note. Glad to see you're making these connections on behalf of the firm. Keep it up. That flipped the problem on its head. On one hand, Dean's stunt had actually impressed her. She thought I was more ambitious than I really was. On the other hand, if I came clean now, it wouldn't just make Dean look bad. It would make me look like a fraud who couldn't control his own name. I sat at my desk, staring at the email chain, heart pounding. This wasn't just about family boundaries anymore. This was about whether I could keep the ground under my own feet. And deep down, I knew Dean wasn't going to stop unless someone forced him to. The only question was, who was going to pay the bigger price first, him or me? That week felt like walking a tightrope. At work, I kept up the appearance that I was the one making those outside connections. My boss seemed pleased, even a little surprised by my initiative. Meanwhile, every email, every phone call that came in made me tense, waiting for the moment Dean's version of me said or promised something I couldn't take back. At home, I couldn't stop replaying conversations with him. He didn't see lines, only opportunities. And when I tried to explain what was at stake, he'd roll his eyes and tell me I was too cautious. Nobody's getting hurt. He kept saying, but the truth was, the person getting hurt was me. He just didn't care enough to see it. Then came the kicker. A colleague stopped by my desk to ask about a meeting I had with a city council staffer regarding a redevelopment project. She said he was impressed by how confidently I pitched ideas. Ideas? I hadn't pitched anything. That wasn't me. Dean had somehow sat across from a city official, used my name, and started speaking like he was in my role. That crossed every line imaginable. If you've ever had someone hijack your credibility, you know the panic. It's not just anger, it's dread. Because once your reputation is questioned, it's nearly impossible to fully fix. One slip can follow you for years. And here my brother was, tossing around my name like a trial balloon. No thought for where it might land. I decided I had to draw a hard line. I drove back to my parents' place, walked straight into Dean's room again, and told him it was over. I wanted every document back. Passport, social security card, anything with my name that he'd touched. This time, I didn't ask, I demanded. He didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. You're welcome, by the way. People actually think you've got guts now. You should be thanking me. That's when it hit me. Dean wasn't just borrowing. He believed he was improving me, like I was some brand he could repackage. And worse, he thought I should be grateful. I left with my passport in hand, but I knew it wasn't the end. Because the next day, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a confirmation letter addressed to me, congratulating me on being selected for a second-round interview at a fellowship program I had never applied for. The letter felt heavier than paper should. A fellowship interview, something I had never even heard of, let alone applied for, sitting there with my name printed neatly at the top. It wasn't just another event or handshake anymore. This was official, competitive, and tied to real opportunities. I sat at my kitchen table turning it over, rereading the lines. It sounded prestigious, the kind of thing that could fast-track a career. Only it wasn't my track. It was Dean's, paved with my credentials. I imagined him walking into the interview, polished up, introducing himself as Ethan, And for the first time, I wondered if he actually believed he was me in those rooms. Here's what people don't talk about. When someone hijacks your identity, it's not just about fraud or stolen paperwork. It's about seeing your life split in two, the version you're living, and the version someone else is living in your name. And suddenly, I was competing with my own shadow. I knew I couldn't sit on it. If the fellowship panel followed up with my employer, if they compared notes, the cracks would show. And it wouldn't matter that Dean had been the one in the chair. My name was on the line. My reputation, my job. That night, I drove back to my parents' house again, but instead of heading straight to Dean's room, I sat in the driveway for a long time. Because the truth was, confronting him hadn't worked. Threats, demands, they slid right off him. He treated every boundary like a dare. So I made a different choice. I walked inside, told my parents everything. Not just the documents, not just the events, but the whole scope: Chicago, the planning association, the city staffer, the fellowship letter. I laid it out like evidence, piece by piece, until even they couldn't wave it off as sibling drama. My dad sat stiff in his chair, silent, while my mom tried to soften it, saying maybe Dean just needed guidance. But I could see it in their eyes. They finally realized this wasn't a phase. It was deliberate. Upstairs, Dean must have heard us, because he came down halfway through. He looked at me, then at our parents, and smirked like I'd tattled about something trivial. "You guys don't get it," he said. "I'm making things happen. Ethan's too scared to take these chances." And in that moment, I understood he wasn't sorry. He wasn't going to stop, which meant the next step had to be mine, and it wouldn't be simple. That night ended with shouting, my dad ordering Dean upstairs, and me leaving before I said something I couldn't take back. But the damage was done. My parents finally knew. And Dean knew I wasn't going to quietly let him keep using my name. The next morning, I called the fellowship office listed on the letter. My voice shook, but I told the coordinator straight out. I hadn't applied. Someone must have used my name. There was a pause on the line before she said, carefully, "That's highly irregular. We'll need to review this." Hanging up, I felt equal parts relief and dread. Relief that at least I was on record, dread that now there'd be a paper trail, one that might circle back to my employer. At work, I tried to stay focused, but my mind was buzzing. Every email notification made me jump. Then, mid-afternoon, my boss called me in. She'd received a glowing note from a city council staffer about how I had presented myself in that redevelopment meeting. She was impressed. For a second, I thought about telling her everything right then, but I froze. Instead, I nodded, said thank you, and walked out with my stomach in knots. Here's the truth. When you let a lie live under your name, even if you didn't create it, you start to feel like it is your lie. And worse, you start to wonder if maybe it's helping you, even as it puts you at risk. That night, I got a text from Dean. "You're welcome. That council guy liked you. Don't mess it up." The audacity of it made me laugh out loud, bitterly. He genuinely thought he was helping me. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, leveraging my hesitation, counting on me to be too cautious to expose him. I realized then that the real battle wasn't about documents or events. It was about control. Dean was betting that I'd keep covering for him, because outing him meant admitting to others just how far he'd gotten under my skin. But something shifted in me that week. I stopped asking whether I should protect him and started asking how I could protect myself. So I began collecting proof, screenshots of emails, that fellowship letter, the voicemail from Chicago. Not to show my boss yet, not even to confront Dean again, but because deep down, I knew this wasn't headed for a quiet resolution. It was building to something bigger. By the end of that month, I had a folder on my laptop labeled Dean. Every piece of evidence sat in there. Emails, letters, screenshots, even notes from conversations I hadn't wanted to remember. It felt strange documenting my own brother like he was a suspect, but I needed a safety net. If things blew up, I couldn't afford to be left with just my word against his. The breaking point came sooner than I thought. One Monday morning, my firm got an inquiry from a developer in Chicago thanking me for continuing discussions about a possible partnership. My boss called me in again, this time with a sharper edge in her voice. "Are you seriously negotiating outside contracts without looping us in?" she asked. My mouth went dry. Dean's freelancing under my name had crossed state lines. I knew then that silence wasn't an option anymore. After work, I went straight to HR, closed the office door, and told the whole story. I laid out the emails, the letter, the voicemail. My hand shook as I scrolled through the folder, but I forced myself to keep going. By the end, the HR rep's expression was a mix of disbelief and concern. She didn't say much beyond, "We'll need to review this carefully." Walking out of that office, I felt both lighter and exposed. For the first time, someone outside my family knew. But I also knew it would get back to Dean eventually. That night, he showed up at my apartment, uninvited. He was furious. "You think throwing me under the bus makes you look good? You're nothing without me putting your name out there," he snapped. His voice cracked with anger, but underneath it I heard something else, fear. He knew the walls were closing in. We stood there, two brothers staring each other down, both convinced we were protecting our futures. But only one of us was willing to gamble with someone else's name. He stormed out, slamming the door, and for the first time, I didn't chase him. I let him go. The next day, I got an email from HR asking me to come in for a formal meeting. They wanted to talk about next steps regarding the impersonation issue. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about stopping Dean anymore. This was about whether I'd come out of it with my job, my credibility, and maybe even my own identity intact. The HR meeting was tense. They had my evidence spread out on the table, the fellowship letter on top. My boss was there too, arms crossed, waiting to hear how her dependable coordinator had let things spiral into a circus. I explained everything again, how Dean had used my documents, how he'd shown up in my place, how I'd tried to stop him quietly before it blew up. By the end, the room was quiet. My boss finally sighed and said, "You should have come to us sooner." She wasn't wrong. But instead of firing me, they gave me conditions. I had to file a formal affidavit swearing that my brother had impersonated me without consent, and I had to secure my identity, new passport, new social security safeguards, the works. It was humiliating, but also a lifeline. They weren't letting me go. When I left that room, I felt drained. Yet under the exhaustion was something else, relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying it alone. Dean, though, didn't see it that way. He blew up my phone with texts accusing me of betrayal, saying I'd ruined everything he was building. But the truth was, he'd never been building for me, only through me. And as much as it stung, I finally realized it wasn't my job to shield him from consequences he'd chosen to ignore. Over the next month, things shifted. Word must have spread, because Dean stopped showing up at events under my name. My parents were distant with him, tired of cleaning up his messes. I tightened every lock on my personal files, changed passwords, froze credit where I could. Piece by piece, I took my name back. It wasn't clean, it wasn't heroic, but it was mine again. And maybe that's the bittersweet part. Sometimes family forces you into fights you never wanted, just to protect the life you've worked for. You don't win with big gestures. You win by drawing lines, standing on them, and refusing to let anyone else step into your skin, even if that person shares your last name.